Okay. Yeah, our next speaker is John Sylvester from Liverpool. He's going to talk about temporal exploration of random spanning tree models. John?
Okay, hello, yeah. Thanks for the invitation. So yeah, this is joint work with Sam Barry, Andreas Goebel, Nicholas Klott, and George Stretus, who's here, all from HPI in Potsdam, and of course Victor is here as well. Okay, so just to make sure we're all on the same page, speaking about temporal graphs. So think of a temporal graph as a fully observed sequence of static graphs. Okay, so we can see the full sequence. And all graphs are going to be on a common vertex set, which we're going to say has size n. And okay, this is not a common assumption in temporal graphs generally, but for the problems we're going to consider, we're going to say that each time step, each snapshot is going to be a connected graph. Okay? And we refer to the union over all of the graphs in the sequence, or all of the snapshots. We refer to this as the underlying graph. Okay? So with this covered, what's the model that we're going to consider? So I should mention this is kind of work in progress. I want to speak about something new and exciting. So the price of that is that it's still a little bit work in progress. I think the name is also work in progress. So we've got the random always connected temporal graph, or the RAP2. So you let G be a connected graph on n vertices. You should think of this as your underlying graph, but that is also a bit misleading, as I'll come to in a minute. But so you take some graph G, and then you have a probability distribution on the labeled spanning trees of G. Okay, and this is your mu, and your raptic is a random temporal graph, which is essentially generated by this mu. So what you do is in each time step, you just sample a spanning tree of G from mu. Okay, so yeah, so what's going on with this model? So really, it's actually only a one-parameter model. Okay, this G is a dummy, essentially, because G is not the underlying graph. So why should you see this? So you know, let's say that you have a complete graph, and you just have a single labeled path, and you put all of your probability mass for mu onto this one path. Then you're just going to have in your temporal graph that single static path in each time step. So your underlying graph is going to be that path. But it's useful to think of G, you know, as the host for these labeled graphs, and it could be that you just take a uniform measure mu over all spanning trees, and then your underlying graph will indeed be G. Okay, and it's useful for presenting some results that we have this G here. Okay, but so I just wanted to clear that up. So the main thing here is that you have this measure mu, and you just each time step is a spanning tree sampled of G sampled according to mu. Okay, I guess I'll come back to this model and hopefully explain it a bit more. But this is the model we wanted to consider, and so why spanning trees? Well, you can actually define this with any spanning subgraphs. So you could put a measure on any spanning subgraphs, and that's a perfectly reasonable model. For the problems we're going to consider here, spanning trees are already a sufficiently rich class of spanning subgraphs, because we're going to be considering exploration problems. And so for these problems, the extra edges only really help you. Right? Okay, so what's an alternative viewpoint with this model? So let's say you have your favorite temporal graph parameter, and you're looking to prove a worst case bound on this thing. You can view this as you're battling an adversary, where the adversary knows, you know, which parameter you want to prove an upper bound on, and it is supplying a non-adaptive temporal graph for you to battle against, right? So let's say you want to flood your temporal graph as fast as possible. The adversary sees, okay, John's trying to flood the graph. and we're given this nasty temporal graph. So this would be if you're trying to prove just a worst case bound for all temporal graphs. So what is this model? So if you're trying to prove a worst case bound in this model, it's a little bit like you have the same setup, and the adversary link can then supply a temporal graph, but the time steps are then just randomly reordered. So it's essentially, you can think from this adversarial standpoint, it's like you have a less strong adversary, okay? Because they don't have the power to actually choose the sequence, just choose the graphs that appear in the sequence with some frequencies. Okay, so I mentioned that we're going to be looking at temporal exploration problem. Okay, and so this is going to be the strict path variant. So a strict temporal walk of length t from a starting vertex S is a sequence of vertices. So remember that all our graphs occur on the same vertex set. Such that, okay, you might stay put in one step, but if you don't, and you move vertex, then the edge between these vertices has to be there at that step. Okay, so it's a standard strict temporal path. And the temporal exploration problem is given a temporal graph and a start vertex. What's the length of the shortest strict temporal path? Strict temporal walk, which visits all vertices. Okay. Should mention actually, yes, so Victor and I were coming back from lunch one day, and we actually saw this coach in Liverpool and lost our minds, hurriedly trying to take a photo of it, but couldn't. I managed to rip this off their website. So this is a real coach company called Temporal Travel. You might be lucky enough to see one if you've been there. Oh, you have? Ah, yeah, yes. Okay, so yes, there's some previous work on this. So the problem was introduced by Michael and Spolakis. Okay, if I've missed anything off here, sorry, this is a bit of a brief summary where I've just picked choice points. As I showed, it was empty complete to compute the shortest walk and explores everything. It gives some approximations. Okay, and Ovak, Hoffman, and Kama showed that in the worst case, you can explore any temporal graph, which again is connected each time step, something we'll assume throughout the entire talk, in n squared time. And what's more, this is actually tight, so there is a temporal graph that takes this many steps. Again, they also looked at exploration of where you put some restriction on the underlying graph, namely the tree width or the explainer. And then we have a very restrictive NP completeness result. And I mentioned this is interesting because it's similar to our case, where even if each GI is a tree, it's still NP complete to decide the length of the shortest temporal exploring walk. Okay, some meta results again. If you look at restricting the degree in each snapshot, again, and these authors improved on some of the bounds from Novak, Hoffman, and Kram. Okay, so I guess the takeaway from this really is actually this is quite a difficult problem. So say you have some subclass of temporal graphs, just working out what's the worst case bound on the explorability over the length of the walk, which is actually quite a tricky problem. You've essentially got a real combinatorial explosion of all possible walks, so it's a huge amount of temporal graphs. So what's the motivation for our work? Well, we're going to study the temporal exploration problem on this random model, so the RAC2. And here is the model again. So you essentially have, you have this probability distribution on the labeled spanning trees of some graph G. And in each step, you just randomly sample a tree according to mu, and that's your snapshot. So it's connected in every step because they're spanning trees. So I would want to look at this. So the main question is, are random temporal graphs as difficult to explore as, the worst case, the adversarial deterministic ones. And also the hope is that we might come up with some new constructions of slow instances that are, resilient to small changes, essentially. And then also just understanding the power of a randomizer adversary in this setting. How am I doing for time? Okay, so what's our first result? So the first result is that the expected expiration time of any rat is at most 4 times the number of edges in this fake underlying graph, which is the where you're getting your spanning trees from, essentially. So okay, so how would you read this result? Well, this result is that there is a strategy. So given any g and any mu, there is a strategy such that if you run this strategy in expectation, the length of the walk visiting all vertices will be at most 4 times the number of edges in G. Okay. And how do you prove this? Well, the strategy is actually quite simple. You just take a fixed spanning tree. So this holds for any fixed spanning tree. You just pick one, and do DFS traversal of T, waiting for each edge to appear before crossing. So you just say, okay, well, I've got my favorite spanning tree, G, and I'm now at edge, vertex X. The next vertex I want to cross goes to Y, and now I just wait until this edge actually pops up and I cross it. So if you do that for any tree, you'll get a bound on the expected traversal time of twice, if you cross each edge almost twice in this DFS traversal, times the inverse of the probability that E occurs in any step. Because in each step we just sample a tree from mu, the probability that E is in that time step is independent of time. Okay, that holds for any tree. So then what's the smart thing to do? Well, you maximize over all the trees, right? Which would, well, maximize or minimize this. Okay, so what you do is you then take, for each edge in your graph, you give it a weight E, which is the probability that E appears at the time step. And then you find the maximum spanning tree with Pascal's average. Okay, and then the difficult part is actually analyzing Pascal to getting a good bound on this. So the idea is that you have to use a potential function to track the weights of edges added by Pascal. Yeah, so you have to design this potential function around kind of several insights and invariants. So one of them is that the sum of edges crossing a cut has weight at least 1. So why does this hold? Well, if you have a cut and the sum of weights crossing it is less than 1, then there is some positive probability that you sample a tree where there's no edges going between these two things, and so it wouldn't be a spanning tree. Okay, this observation alone is not going to cut it, and this is a bit delicate, and you essentially have to you can't just say, as with classic kind of analysis using Pascal, that okay, well I've got this edge, it must be the the maximum weight when you're looking for a maximum spanning tree that was going across these two components at that time. Just this alone will not get you actually a bound on this, and you need to actually somehow track the edges you've exposed along the process. So you do that with a potential function as you're exposing edges that come up in Pascal, and you have and then the potential function naturally bounds this thing, and then there's a trivial upper bound on the potential function based on the way it's designed, that the potential is always at most twice the number of edges. Okay. Yes, so that's the upper bound we have. And what's quite nice about this is that it recovers kind of n squared in the worst case, which matches the deterministic bound. Okay, but maybe more on that later. Okay, what about a lower bound? So we can show that there exists a raptug with expected expiration time n to the 3/2. Okay, and what do we do? Well, we take the early back of the camera example, which gives a worst case of n squared for the deterministic case, and then we just randomly reorder the time steps. Okay, so okay, I hope Thomas doesn't mind if I borrow this for your paper. So if you're not familiar with this example, it's very nice. What you have is you have kind of we partition the vertex set into two classes of size n/2, and you have on the left these are going to be the centers of some stars where the center is moving periodically through this vertex set, and on the left you have kind of the leaves of the star. So there is this observation in their paper that to get from one leaf Li to another leaf Lj, you have to do so by going via one of the centers while it is the center of the star. So say you're at leaf 2, you want to get to leaf 5. Okay, well your only option is to go from here to the center of the star at the current time, but by the time you've done that, the center has moved, and so then you're stuck basically at one of these vertices, which in every step is like a new leaf. So it doesn't help you moving across the edges connected to, because again you get to the center of the star and the centers move by the time together. So you basically have to wait. So go to a center and then wait for the vertex you just moved to become the center of the star again before you can get to your next leaf. So this very nice construction gives you, because you're periodically just cycling through these, it gives you an n squared lower bound, which matches the upper bound group. So what do? We just shuffle the time steps. And okay, so what you can observe, so this thing still holds. So to get from one leaf to another, you have to go via a center at the time that it is a center. So what you do is you go to your center and you have to wait, which you have a choice over, and you have to wait for it again to be a center. So so by the birthday paradox, if you just look at any section of the you think of the process that just lists the centers of the stars. Okay, if you just look at a square root n length section, in expectation you should see some center, some vertex Ci, which is the center of the star twice within this square root n length interval. And so you could then use this square root n length interval to visit a vertex. Okay, so that's the idea, and you can do that and get an upper bound. And then for the lower bound, well, this thing is of course random, so there could be some square root n length intervals, some intervals that are shorter than square root n length, where you actually again see this same center of the star twice. But essentially, this doesn't happen too often, so you can't abuse this to get a faster time for expectation. So yeah, so this is the lower bound. Okay, so yeah, we have a few other results for this general model, but I want to speak about a special case, which is quite interesting. So in general, if you have any probability distribution over the spanning trees, but you can, we need to speed up, but you can symmetrize this by saying, okay, well, if two spanning trees are isomorphic, they have to have the same probability. Okay, so this is quite a restriction on the model. So, for example, this excludes this early back open camera example, because you know if you look at the spanning trees of the underlying graph, and each spanning tree has to have the same probability mass, then you start getting centers on this side as well. And so actually then this degenerates and you just get an exploration of n, just hop around. So so it is a restriction. Okay, and we're going to restrict it even further and say that there's a really symmetric case, which is where the underlying graph is a clique. You know, this G is a clique, and so with further restrictions on mu that we don't actually need, but you know, let's just jump to this model, which is kind of the random bag of trees model. So you have some set S of trees, and at each step, you just sample the tree uniformly from S, and then you permute the vertex labels using a random permutation. Okay. So what can we show for this model? So the expected expiration time in this random tree model is at most n log n. And this is quite a simple Q argument. So that each snapshot is connected. So there is at least one edge leaving the current vertex if you're in a vertex. Okay, so there could be more than one edges, but since the labels are randomly commuted, the other endpoints of these edges is a uniformly random set in your graph. And so at each time step, you just look at the outgoing edges in the time step, and you just pick one uniformly at random. Then what's actually happening? Well, you're actually just hopping to a random vertex in each step. And so this is a random walk on the clique, which is the coupon collector process, and the cover time of that is n log n, expectation. Okay, so this is an upper bound of n log n in this model. And a trivial lower bound is n, because you need to visit all of the vertices. Okay, but then what we can show is that this lower bound is actually tight. So if you take S just being even a single path that goes through the vertices, because you're randomly commuting the labels at each step, essentially, typically you end up with a degree that has a vertex that has degree 2 in each time step, and then you have 2 options. So it kind of branches, giving you many options, and you can use that even to have a kind of online strategy, cover the graph with order at a time. Okay, and so the lower bound is actually tight. So what about the upper bound? Is the upper bound just wrong? Well, no. If you take S to be a star, and then randomly commute its vertices each time, then the expiration time of this is actually, sorry, I should not say that at the moment. It should say it's beta n log n. Okay, and why is this? So this is kind of the opposite thing happens, and at most times you're actually just a leaf, the star, and so you're only getting one option. And so basically you can couple it with the coupon collector process until you have this time step where you are actually become the center. But this happens very rarely. And this only happens log n times, really. So you can pretty much disregard that. And yeah, so this the exploration is kind of again. Okay. Right, so yeah, as I said, this is work in progress. So what are our next steps? We're still working on something we're working on is a partial characterization of the set S in this random tree model, the unlabeled one, where you have a small or large exploration time. So what is it about the set of trees that makes it quicker or slower to explore? We think we have a partial characterization of that. Okay, and we're also working on proving a little O(n) square bound for the graph for any mu and any g. So this really should be true. It should not be the case. So if this is not true, I mean you're basically saying that you know you have this any temporal graph chosen by the adversary, and even if you scramble the steps, it's still hard to explore. This shouldn't be true. I mean, it should be the case that you have it's faster to cover this route than the worst case. Okay, so these are things we're working on. Something which is a future direction really is it'd be nice to obtain more results for the symmetric raptic, where mu has to be the same, give the same weight to any two isomorphic spanning trees. Yeah, so we've kind of done the simple case where this is a clique. But what about when it's not a clique? It'd be nicer to understand that a bit better. And this would, yeah, it'd be nicer to see if there's some gaps. So where the symmetry really makes it easy to explore the graph. Thank you. Yes, that's good.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the online audience?
I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah. So what happens, John, when the mu is uniform on general graphs? Is it the same as the random tree model?
Random tree model, sorry?
No. If we have a general graph and the probability distribution mu is uniform, then what happens?
Well, yeah, that should be symmetric, right? Because you're giving the same probability to, if you have two, every single subtree gets the same probability.
Yes.
And so if you look at two subtrees that are isomorphic, then by default they get the same probability. So this is a special case of the symmetric model.
Okay.
Yeah.
Your results about bounds on exploration time on expectation, can they be done with high probability?
You should be able to, yes. Certainly. Oh, okay. I'm not sure about this Kruskal business. This might be a bit technical.
Yeah.
Certainly anything where we analyze a specific graph, it should go with high probability. I need to think. That's actually something that's something I've been meaning to do, is try and get the Kruskal argument with high probability. That would be very nice, I think. Possibly there's a martingale in there somewhere. We could do that.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you, Paul. Any other questions from the audience? Online. From offline audience, please, Thomas.
So in our old 2015 paper, we also had a random graph model where we said every edge has a certain probability to be present in every step.
Okay.
And the constraint was that over every cut, the sum of the probabilities is at least one.
Okay.
And so we did the same thing. We said, okay, to fix a spanning tree based on edge weights, based on these probabilities, and then in expectation we need O of m steps to O of number of edge steps to explore the graph. And with high probability, you can do it in O of m times log n steps. So I think that's very closely related to what you do, because with your spanning tree, you also exploit essentially that the probability of having an edge over every cut is at least one for every cut. So I think these two are quite closely related, probably.
Well, it sounded very closely related. Does that not mean you've proved your result is this pretty much, or?
So we have essentially this. We also looked at a model where every edge is regularly present in certain intervals, and for that model we have O of number of edges. And then we said if it's randomly present, then that's in expectation it's more or less the same, and you have O of m exploration. So I think it's very close to that, so it's useful to.
Okay, sorry, I missed that.
No worries.
Okay, I see. So you think it's not exactly the same, but very close, or?
The property.
It's very close. I'm not sure exactly how you analyze your model, but I think your model also has this property that over every cut, if you count the probabilities of edges being present over that cut, that will be at least one.
Yes.
And basically we analyzed our algorithm under that assumption. So I think it's probably quite similar to what we're looking at.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I should have seen that. Okay.
And one other comment I have, so in this random model, you can look at two different scenarios. You can assume the whole temporal graph is randomly created. You see the whole graph, and then do your exploration.
Mhm.
Or you can assume you just know the probability distribution, but you don't know what the future steps will be.
Ah, okay,
And
yes.
so basically some of your results, where you kind of fix the spanning tree and then you just walk around the spanning tree,
Mhm.
for that you don't know the future realization, right? You just
Right.
need to know the probability distribution.
Yes.
But for the randomly computed stars, where you exploit the birthday paradox,
Yes.
you can actually exploit that only if you know the future steps.
Yes, correct.
So now I think maybe it's also interesting to look at in this random model, what's the gap or difference between knowing all the future steps and having to do it online without knowing the future steps.
Okay, yes. Yeah, like the dynamic versus temporal.
Exactly. So for example, this randomly computing the stars, maybe if you don't know the future and you cannot exploit the birthday paradox, maybe then it's actually still beta n squared, even in the randomly computed model. I'm not sure, but
Yes, it could be. Yeah, because yes, you essentially actually basically just making a choice, but in expectation you have to wait in half for that to come back.
exactly.
Yeah.
You just know the centers will be randomly computed in the future, but you have no way of choosing a good one without knowing what the future is. So in expectation, you have to wait another 2 steps.
Okay, yes. Ah, okay, yes. Okay, nice. Okay, well, I'm very sorry if we just rediscovered your response.
No problem.
You okay? Okay, yeah, okay, I should have read that.
Okay, I think we don't have time
Yeah.
for the questions, so let's thank John again.